Buongiorno, good morning. And I'd like to thank the organisers for inviting me to speak here this morning. I work for the Centre for Environment, Fisheries and Aquaculture Science in the UK, and in the introduction, my interest in spatial analysis straddled both the terrestrial and marine environments. So at CEFAS, we do a wide range of analysis and research to support environmental assessments and to support and inform policy implementation in the marine and aquatic environments. And this morning I'm going to tell you about some work that we've done recently or over the last few years to look at the site suitability for aquaculture, for new aquaculture production. So I'll just give you a brief background to the study that I'm going to describe in quite a lot of detail. In 2020, we were approached by the Dorset and East Devon Fishermen's Local Action Group, which is rather a mouthful, so we call it the Dorset and East Devon Flag. And they wanted us to help them investigate the potential for new aquaculture production sites on the southwest coast of England. And the aim was to provide a detailed assessment of the range of species that could be grown there, any limitations or constraints to growing such species in that area, and also to provide accessible advice to local businesses, potential growers, based on our scientific expertise and based on also the opinions of local residents and local community members. So the first thing we did was to divide up the potential species groups into different marine aquaculture systems, as different species require different environmental conditions, etc., for growing. And we looked at each individual species, but also the potential for multi-trophic aquaculture. That's where two or more species are grown together. And then we looked at the optimal physiological conditions for each of these species or combinations of species. For instance, water quality parameters, sea surface, sea temperature, salinity, etc., chemical composition, and light availability, because certain species require sunlight which isn't available at depth or in shaded areas. And apart from these physical constraints and the chemical constraints to growing, there's also the need to take into consideration human infrastructure, activities that may take place in the area. And the two maps shown on the left-hand side here were maps of models developed by the Marine Management Organisation in the UK. And they developed these maps for all of the coastal areas of the UK. The upper map, for instance, looks at recreational fishing in the area of concern, where the redder areas represent high-intensity fishing, and the bluer areas represent a lower occurrence of recreational fishing in those areas. And apart from fishing and other sort of recreational activities, we needed to take into consideration the possibility of contamination of those sites. So, for instance, potential contamination from wastewater discharges, which may make the water unsuitable for growing certain species or for growing any species that were for human consumption or otherwise. And then there were other known constraints, such as biotoxins, animal disease, the presence of which had to be taken into consideration, in order to ensure that the waters were safe for aquaculture production, but also things like aesthetics. And in the second, the lower map, this is shown visibility from land. So any additional infrastructure in the coastal waters would be visible from certain areas on the land, and the dark blue areas represent the areas of highest visibility. Now, you would imagine that most of the areas of highest visibility would be along the coast, but you can see a dark ridge that's somewhere higher, further north, further inland, and this is where the area of land, the topography is quite steep. There's quite a steep hill, a chalk ridge, and so from anywhere along that chalk ridge, the coastal waters are visible. So we started off with a base map where we delineated the area of remit of the Dorset Flag organisation. And we included all of the land associated with that coastal area, which involves river basins that drain two waters along that coastal strip. And in the centre of the map, towards the south, where there's that little island dropping down, just to the north there, on the main coastline, that's where our organisation is situated. So we kind of right in the middle of the area of concern there. Once we got the base map, which also included bathymetry, the depth of the water, the elevation of the land, so the waters go down to 100 metres depth at the maximum depth in that particular area, and the land rises up to about almost 300 metres. We also had to take into consideration the natural habitats. So this larger map shows which support different types of species, etc. And it ranges from muds and sands to hard rocky substrates. So there's hard rocky seabeds. So there's quite a lot of variability across this small area. We also needed to take into consideration regulatory and conservation areas. So, for instance, there are marine protected areas where there are sensitive species that could be damaged by certain activities, and there are sites of special scientific interest where perhaps there are rare species present and extra additional limitations would be put in place. Then there's industry and transport. To the east of the area, just beyond the area of interest, there's a large harbour, Poole Harbour, where there's quite a lot of ferry and freight transport. So there are transport routes along in this area which would need to be taken into consideration. And in the middle of the map, where there are the hashed circles there, for instance, that is Weymouth Bay. It's important for recreational sailing, sporting, water sports, and it was actually the site of the sailing competition in the 2012 Olympics. So there are lots of activities, for instance, that need to be taken into consideration. But also further infrastructure and obstructions. There are lots of navigational buoys to mark areas for vessel navigation, and there's an underwater cable area which would need to be avoided. And also, you can see dotted around those little black flecks, numerous shipwrecks from over the last 200 or 300 years, possibly. The waters around, particularly around that coastal area, are a little bit treacherous sometimes. So, for any sort of aquaculture that involved impacting on the seabed, you'd need to take into consideration that there may be obstructions on the seabed also. So we had to use a very integrated GIS approach to identify these sites. So in addition to mapping all the boundaries or all of the features that I've already told you about, Our hydrodynamic modelers and chemical modelers at CEFAS modeled the physical water parameters, significant wave height. There's quite a large tidal range in many areas. The areas prone to storms coming through, Atlantic storms coming through the English Channel, and these could cause damage to exposed sites where certain types of aquaculture might be difficult, to say the least. And we also had, they modelled the tidal cycles. Some areas would become too shallow in at certain times of the tide, etc. And also those tidal cycles and currents would affect the transportation of any, for instance, contaminant plumes. So there are two particular wastewater disposal sites. This is treated wastewater, nevertheless it's wastewater, and so those plumes were modelled under different tidal cycles, different prevailing currents, and the maximum areas of those plumes would be excluded from any potential growing. And these combined layers were used to create species-specific GIS layers to inform aquaculture production. So the next thing, very important thing, was stakeholder consultation. These initial species-specific maps that were produced were taken along. We held a stakeholder workshop where we invited a range of participants, including members of the local community, local authorities, business, industry, and fishermen. And we invited them to make comments on what they thought would be appropriate in certain areas for those particular species. We also gave them various maps of the entire area and gave them stickers with different types of aquaculture infrastructure, species-specific again, and asked them to put those stickers where they thought would be most appropriate to site them, those specific species aquaculture farming methods within the area. We also encouraged them to make comments, including negative comments. We wanted to know where opinions were against certain types of aquaculture in certain locations. And that detailed knowledge, because these are people on the ground who know what goes on where, they work in those environments, they live in those environments. That detailed knowledge was crucial to helping us revise and refine the final suitability maps. So, our final outputs were provided to Dorset and East Devon Aquaculture. They engaged with a web designer to create a website of aquaculture mapping. So this is freely accessible to all. The URL is there if you wanted to go along and visit it yourself. And this aquaculture map has all of the layers that we created, including all of the base layers, the natural habitats, infrastructure, etc., and all of the specimen layers. And the user of this website can switch on and off any of those layers as they wish to see which areas may be suitable or unsuitable for certain types of aquaculture. There's a detailed report on that website also that details all the methodology and can be, again, freely downloaded. Also a GIS catalogue which gives information of the data sources of all the data used and for all the layers. And the full set of shapefiles that we produced, the species-specific suitability layers, They are all readily available for download. I'm not sure whether I think there may be a link to them on this site, but they're certainly downloadable from the CEFAS website, open public website. And then there's also a layered PDF that can be used offline. So this PDF has the function where you can also switch the layers on and off, and this is suitable for use offline and also accessible to those without any GIS capability. So, just to round off, we continued developing these tools, and my colleagues have worked on various projects using these very same methods. A couple of examples given here. The upper one was the potential for co-location of seaweed production with offshore wind farms in the North Sea. And the lower example is the AquaSmart planning tool, which was developed to support sustainable aquaculture development in Malaysia. And this aligns with the Penang 2030 agenda on food security and environmental health. And I'll just leave you with a picture of some seaweed production in the Philippines. And this is another project that our organisation helped on in the development of a spatial planning tool. Okay, so thank you very much, and please feel free to ask questions. Thank you.